All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We are setting the scene for corporate financial distress today. We're talking about a world where every single rule, filing, and covenant is literally a matter of life and death for a company. And look, if you're gearing up for the Series 79, you can't just memorize this stuff. You've got to know exactly why it works the way it does, so you can absolutely crush those weird scenario questions they throw at you.
But hey, real quick, this explainer is brought to you by CertFuel. They've got a full Series 79 course loaded with adaptive study quizzes, smart flashcards, and unlimited practice exams that are weighted exactly like the real thing. It's totally what you need to lock this in, so definitely check them out at certfuel.com. All right, let's get into the chaos. So to get us started, I want you to picture our highly stressed, entirely fictional friend, Ingrid the issuer. Now, imagine Ingrid just accidentally drove her massively leveraged company right off a financial cliff and the whole thing has just burst into flames. The money's gone, the creditors are literally circling the wreckage. So the big question is, who exactly gets to claim the salvage from this total disaster?
That brings us to Section 1, the priority waterfall.
Okay, so this is how distress actually pays out. It's a strict, unyielding hierarchy governed by what's called the absolute priority rule. At the very top, you've got debtor in possession, or DIP financing. Below that, admin expenses. Then your secured folks, down through the unsecured and mezzanine layers, all the way to equity down at the absolute bottom. Now, under the absolute priority rule, every single rank must be paid in full, like every penny, before the next rank down gets a drop. And here's the brutal truth of it all. Equity gets totally wiped out before junior debt is even touched. Remember Ingrid? Yeah, her common stock is basically just really expensive wallpaper now.
Now watch out for this. This is a massive exam trap they love to set up. Trade suppliers. If a question asks where the vendor who drops off Ingrid's printer paper sets, they are senior UN-secured creditors. Got it? That means they actually jump the line, sitting ahead of subordinated and mezzanine debt, but firmly behind those secured lenders. Seriously, do not get tricked into throwing the trade suppliers at the bottom of the pile. Another quick thing, never ever confuse mezzanine with equity. The exam might try to get cute and call it equity-like. Don't buy it. Mezzanine is strictly debt. It sits below the senior classes, sure, but it is always, always above preferred and common stock in that waterfall.
All right, moving right along to Section 2, Loan Docs and Covenants.
Enter our second character, Blake the banker. Blake steps in to try and untangle the insanely messy paperwork governing Ingrid's catastrophic debts. And here is the single most tested document distinction you're going to see on the Series 79. Bank debt versus bonds. A credit agreement is a private bank loan. It's got an active administrative agent and floating rates. An indenture, on the other hand, is a public bond contract with a totally passive trustee, fixed rates, and if it's over $10 million, it's governed by the Trust Indenture Act. So, active agent versus passive trustee. You got to burn that into your memory. Okay, I want you to literally pause the explainer right now. Read the screen. Which type of covenant trips default automatically every single quarter? Seriously, lock in your guess right now before we move on. Ready? If you guessed maintenance covenants, you absolutely nailed it. Think of a maintenance covenant kind of like a corporate breathalyzer test that Ingrid has to blow into every single fiscal quarter. If her leverage ratio is too high, she automatically fails, and boom, default. Incurrence covenants, they're completely asleep. They do nothing until Ingrid attempts to actually do something strictly prohibited, like taking on more debt to buy a corporate jet. Which leads us to Section 3, Surviving Chapter 11 Bankruptcy. So Ingrid failed her breathalyzer, her covenants, and now she's officially on life support in Chapter 11. The absolute instant she files, this automatic stay kicks in and freezes all collections, no lawsuits, no nothing. And crucially, management stays in place. But she needs cash to keep the lights on, right? That brings us to DIP financing tiers. By the time we hit Tier 4, if Ingrid wants a priming lien to buy, solid gold lifeboats while her ship is literally sinking, that new lender can actually jump the line ahead of existing secured creditors. But, and this is a massive but, they can only do that if the existing primed lender gets adequate protection against their collateral losing value. All right, heads up, time for another glaring exam trap. Do not fall for this one. The U.S. trustee and a Chapter 11 trustee are wildly different things. The U.S. trustee is really just a Department of Justice supervisor overseeing the whole process. A Chapter 11 trustee, though, that is a super rare, cause-based replacement for management. You only get a Chapter 11 trustee if Ingrid committed outright fraud or gross mismanagement. Otherwise, Ingrid stays firmly in charge as the debtor in possession. Okay, so Ingrid needs her creditors to actually vote on a reorganization plan. I need you to burn this math into your brain right now. 2/3 and 1/2. For a class of creditors to accept a plan, you need more than 2/3 in dollar amount and more than 1/2 in the total number of voting holders. Both prongs have to clear. Amount and number, no exceptions. This is the grueling path of a traditional Chapter 11. You file, get the automatic stay, draft a disclosure statement, wait around for voting, and finally have a confirmation hearing. Guys, this can take 300 plus days, which is exactly why so many companies opt for a Section 363 going concern asset sale instead. A 363 sale totally skips the voting part and takes maybe 60 to 90 days. Always remember the why here. Speed is absolutely everything when you're in distress. Okay, time for another pause. Let's say the voting math works out perfectly. Ingrid gets her 2/3 in amounts and 1/2 in number. If the class accepts the deal, is the best interest test skipped? What do you think? Make your guess. The answer is a massive yes. We still need it, because the crucial point here is that the best interest test is a holder-by-holder test. It protects every single dissenting individual holder. It basically ensures that even if they got outvoted by the majority, they still walk away with at least what they would have received if the company was totally liquidated in Chapter 7. Basically, it protects the little guy.
Next up, Section 4, M&A registration and SEC.
Let's shift gears for a second and look at Blake the banker's ultimate escape hatch, using mergers and acquisitions to drag Ingrid's company out of the fire entirely. Now, if Blake actually finds a buyer, you have to know the merger vote as sale rule. The big takeaway here is that if a target's shareholders are voting on a stock-for-stock merger, the SEC legally considers that a sale of the acquirer's securities. Since new stock is being issued to them, boom, it mandates a Form S-4 registration. But if it's an all-cash deal, no new securities are issued, which means absolutely no S-4 is required. And here is your big number to memorize for this section. 27. That Form S-4, it is not instantaneous. You've got to plan for a first-round SEC staff review cycle that takes roughly 27 business days. Time is money, especially in distress, and Blake has to bake those 27 days right into his deal timeline. All right, homestretch, Section 5, Rapid Fire Exam Recap. Let's go! Let's hit these top testable points at lightning speed so they really stick with you on exam day. Recap 1. Bring it back to that absolute priority waterfall we talked about earlier. Post-petition, DIP financing, and admin claims always get fed before the pre-petition secured lenders. It makes sense, right? You have to pay the people keeping the hospital running before you pay the people who originally brought the patient in. Recap 2. Remember Blake? Well, he can actually try to keep this whole mess entirely out of bankruptcy court with an out-of-court exchange offer. Sure, it's fast, but to actually pull it off, he needs near-perfect participation, like a 95 to 99% tender rate, just to strip covenants from the stub bonds via exit consents. If those holdouts refuse to play ball, the whole out-of-court deal just dies on the vine. And that brings us to the end. So now that you've got the actual rules of corporate survival locked in, how are you going to apply these on test day and beyond? If you were Blake the banker, staring down a balance sheet that is literally on fire, how would you use these rules to structure your next bulletproof deal? Keep that in mind as you review your notes, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.